But I just thought it would be nice for folks to get a little bit of an overview. You can walk away with some real practical tools that work right away. And if you are considering doing the class, this would give you a chance to see a little bit of what we do. So without further ado, let me just give a brief introduction of myself. I'm Jody Johnston-Powell. I'm a licensed social worker, certified family life educator, second generation parent educator, which means while I was growing up, my parents were teaching parenting classes. And they took the class when I was about 8 years old. So it dates me, but it was back in the day of reel-to-reel audio tape. I only see a few faces of recognition out there when I say reel-to-reel audio tape. But back then, they were making tapes for their classes, and so they would ask me to act up like some snotty-nosed bratty kid, and then they would record some discipline tool or some communication tool or whatever. So even when I was as young as 8, I was starting to learn this language, is what I would call my first parenting language. I think a lot of us, we learn whatever language we were brought up with, and then when we get to be older and we have our own kids, if that isn't working or if we want something different, then it's kind of like we got to go out and learn a whole new language, or at least tweak our language skills a little bit. So I was fortunate in that I was able to learn that as my first language. And as I've worked in protective service, for about 30 years now, I've been working with parents of all diverse backgrounds and all different kinds of settings, foster parents. Some of my foster parent graduates are here tonight, and adoptive parents. So I've been working with parents many years. In the first about 8 years that I worked with parents, I just used my mom's step kit and would refer parents to about 6 different key parenting curricula that were out at the time. These were the ones that were evidence-based, that had some good long-term results. But back in the 80s, there were only about 30 years of outcome results. We now have, if I do my addition right, what would that be? 50, 60 years of outcome results for evidence-based parenting. And so I started out with all these different tools, and then I was hired by Catholic Social Services here in the Dayton area, and they said, well, we can't afford to buy every parent 6 books because the information is spread all over the place, but you can write handouts and make unlimited copies. So that's really where I started going through, I had hundreds of resources, finding the best evidence-based tools that were in there and pulling them into one resource. Obviously, there were hundreds, and so as I was doing that, I started organizing them according to what they did. So for example, whenever I would find a tool that helped build self-esteem, I put it in what I called the self-esteem tool set. If I found a tool that was good for listening, then that would go in the listening tool set. So it's very logical how I grouped things. And I found that there was a particular order, that if people would learn the tools in a particular order, they ended up getting better results. It was easier for them to learn. Everybody walked in the first night wanting discipline. And I learned early on, if we talk about discipline and they don't have prevention skills, or there's a lot of pieces that go into being able not only to discipline well, but to get really good results. If they hadn't learned those in a particular order, it just wasn't working for them. So I started teaching it in a particular order, and that's where part of this came. Then within a couple of years, something very surprising happened. As I started teaching parents, they would go home, and not only would they try these skills with their kids, but they talked to maybe their spouse about it. And then they realized that it was improving their relationship with their spouse. And then they would go to work, and maybe they were a supervisor, and so they would start to use this with their employees, and they'd see the performance improve. And then I would have teachers saying they were using it in the classroom. And what I realized is that these are really great universal relationship skills that can really work in almost any situation, in almost any relationship. So that was interesting enough. What really surprised me, though, is that there were 3 key questions that, there's a lot of questions you ask yourself to figure out, okay, what's going on in this situation and what I should do. But there were 3 key questions that kept rising to the top. And this was back when my kids were still young, and even though I'm second generation parent educator, I'm still a human being. I was still an imperfect parent. I was still young, immature, had my own personality issues. I was a bit of a perfectionist, and I might be able to say I was a control freak. I was definitely borderline. So I had my own issues, just like any other parent does. I didn't have perfect kids. I wasn't a perfect parent. And so there would be times, I was a stay-at-home mom for about 8 years. I started the Family Network, which is a local parent-to-parent organization, and actually was volunteering full-time for that, just about. Anyway, I started teaching the classes in the community, and at home, I'm trying to practice what I preach. I'm trying to live what I know. And I would get frustrated too. You know, I had a toddler, and there were times when my toddler also I would feel rather frazzled. And I call my husband at work. My husband is engineering, physics, very logical-minded decision maker. And I'd say, I'm ready to lose it with the kids, you know, just like haven't you all felt that way at moments? And he would start asking me these 3 key questions. And I realized that every time I called, he'd ask the same 3 questions. And every time, if I could just ask myself those same 3 questions, I always figured out what type of problem it was. So that was the beginning of what I now call the universal blueprint. There's 2 pieces to it, and we're going to get to it actually on the back end. I usually, in the full-length class, we learn it way up front, but I'm actually going to do it on the back end because I'm going to demonstrate how we use that to solve problems when we get to some of your questions. The 2 pieces of it are these 3 questions, and then 5 steps that take us all the way from prevention to listening to communication to understanding why kids are misbehaving and how to redirect it, and then on to discipline, which are 5 basic steps. So by the end of tonight, you're going to just see a brief overview of what those are, and I'll demonstrate how we can apply that to some of the questions that you have. Before that, what I'd like to be able to do is to just go through and give you about 3 or 4 really key skills tonight, so that way you can walk out of here, and when you go back home or you go talk to your spouse or you go back to work or whatever, you'll be able to actually use some of the skills and start getting some results right away. The universal blueprint, as I said, is universal. So that means any parent can use it, and you can use it in any relationship. At this point, the program has been replicated all over the world for over 20 years. I've been certifying other instructors. And so what we're seeing is across cultures, it doesn't matter how much money you make, how much education, what your race is, what your ethnicity is, your religion, any of that. It's universal. If you have human children, and I know sometimes you question that when they're acting like little monkeys jumping off the bed, right? But if you have human children and you are a human being, there are some human principles that apply. That part is universal. What's individual about it, and I'm a real systems thinker, I'm a patterns thinker. I group things and then I find systems that anybody can use, but they can use it in a way that works for them. And it's just the way my brain works. So what I did is I took that universal and I started looking at how can every single person use this in a way that meets their individual needs. And those 3 questions are actually what does that, is what gets it down to individual needs. You could come to a workshop like this every day of the week, and you could ask me questions, and I could take what I know, and I could say, okay, go home and try this. Who's figuring all of that out for you? I am. Wouldn't you like to be able to know how to ask those same 3 questions, and without having to call somebody, without having to get on the internet to read something, wouldn't you like to be able to ask those questions and be able to know, okay, right now in this split second of time with this kid, this is what's going on, and this would be the most effective thing to do. So that's really what the full-length class teaches, and what I'm going to do tonight is just give you a couple of the key tools that you'll be able to go home and use. So does that sound good?